On Friday, the 14th of September, 2007, Kevin and Glennis Gosden returned home from work, expecting an ordinary evening. But inside their quiet family home in Doncaster, something was terribly wrong. School had only been back for 2 weeks, and 14-year-old Andrew Gosden and his older sister Charlotte had settled back into their usual routines. At first, when they arrived home that evening, everything appeared normal. Andrew didn't come to greet them, but they thought little of it, assuming he was downstairs gaming or reading quietly as he often did. Dinner was already planned, a home-cooked meal with their local vicar, a family friend who was due to visit that night. Only Charlotte emerged when the food was ready. Kevin went upstairs to call Andrew, expecting to find him in his room. Instead, he noticed Andrew's school blazer and tie neatly draped over the back of a chair, a sign he'd been home after school and changed as usual. But Andrew wasn't there. Kevin searched the house, every room, the cellar, the garden. There was no sign of his son anywhere. If Andrew had gone out, he would always leave a note. At first, his parents weren't overly alarmed. Andrew had a few friends living nearby, and they assumed he may have gone to see one of them and simply lost track of time. He didn't own a mobile phone, he'd never wanted one, so there was no way to call or text him. For his last birthday, he'd asked for an Xbox instead. But as the evening wore on, concern quickly turned to confusion. Phone calls to friends revealed Andrew wasn't with any of them. Then came the most worrying discovery of all. Andrew hadn't been at school that day either. So if he'd left for school that morning, where was he?
Welcome to Crime Bites. My name is Maya. Today we're diving into the baffling disappearance of 14-year-old Andrew Gosden, the quiet schoolboy who left home one morning in 2007 and vanished after arriving in London, never to be seen again. Despite CCTV sightings, nationwide appeals, and years of investigation, Andrew's case remains one of the UK's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Nearly 2 decades later, his family are still searching for answers about what really happened after he stepped off that train. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This episode discusses the disappearance of a child and may be distressing for some viewers, so viewer discretion is advised.
The morning of September 14th, 2007 had begun like any other. Andrew put on his school uniform and left the house at around 8:05 a.m., setting off to catch the bus to Macaulay Catholic High School. It was a routine he followed every weekday without fail. A local vicar, Alan Murray, later reported seeing Andrew walking alone through a nearby park that morning. At the time, he thought nothing of it. It could easily have been a shortcut to the bus stop. When he failed to arrive at school, staff attempted to call the Gosden home to report his absence. But with both of his parents already at work, there was no answer. As Kevin and Glennis began to realize Andrew was missing later that evening, their first fear was that he'd had some kind of accident on the way to school. They searched the area surrounding their home, then drove along his usual bus route, scanning the streets and pavements for any sign of him. They began calling local hospitals, desperately asking if any unidentified teenage boy had been admitted that day. None had. As the hours passed and darkness fell, hope quickly turned to dread. At 9 p.m., with still no sign of Andrew and no explanation for his disappearance, his parents contacted police and reported their 14-year-old son missing. From the very beginning, Andrew's family were certain of one thing: he had not run away. He was a reliable, timid boy who hated the thought of upsetting anyone, especially his parents. Kevin and Glennis Gosden were both speech therapists with stable careers, and Andrew's home life was comfortable and secure. There were no obvious problems, no tensions, and no signs that he wanted to escape. He wasn't being bullied, he had no known mental health struggles, and there was nothing in his behavior leading up to that Friday that suggested anything was wrong. When Kevin had asked him just days earlier how he was finding the new school term, Andrew gave no indication of any worries or concerns. Everything appeared completely normal. Andrew was especially close to his older sister, Charlotte. The two shared many of the same interests, including a love of heavy metal music, and if anything had been troubling him, his family believed he would have confided in her. The night before he disappeared had been entirely ordinary. The family ate dinner together as usual, and afterwards, Andrew helped his father wash the dishes, a simple, routine moment that would later take on heartbreaking significance. There had been no arguments, no signs of distress, no hint that by the next morning, Andrew Gosden would be gone. As investigators began piecing together Andrew's final known movements, a far more puzzling timeline started to emerge. On the morning he disappeared, Andrew had walked to a nearby cash machine and withdrawn £200, almost all of the £214 he had saved in his bank account. It was an unusually large withdrawal for a boy who rarely spent money and had no obvious reason to need it. At around 8:30 a.m., shortly after his parents had left for work, a neighbor's CCTV captured Andrew returning home. Just minutes later, he appeared again, but this time he looked completely different. He had changed out of his school uniform and was now wearing jeans, a black Slipknot band t-shirt, and carrying a small black satchel. Back inside his bedroom, his school blazer and tie were left behind. His keys, wallet, and handheld PlayStation were gone. Yet strangely, he had left the charger behind and hadn't taken a jacket, despite the cool September weather. It suggested he hadn't planned to be away for long, but the near-empty bank account told a different story. Because of Andrew's age and the unusual circumstances, police quickly classified him as a high-risk missing person and began closely examining his home life. Officers interviewed each member of the Gosden family, searching for any signs of conflict or mistreatment that might explain a teenager running away. They found none.
Kevin and Glennis were open and cooperative, describing a loving, stable household and a close relationship with both of their children. Nothing suggested Andrew had a reason to flee. Statistically, police knew that most missing children under 18 returned home within 24 hours. So at first, there was hope that Andrew would simply reappear. Friends and family even traveled to Whitby the following day, a seaside town Andrew loved and visited often on family holidays, wondering if he might have made his way there alone. But there was no sign of him there either.
Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He stood at around 5'3", slim, with light brown hair that fell in a fringe across his forehead. He wore strong prescription glasses and had a distinctive double ridge on his right ear, a unique feature that made him easily identifiable. He wasn't the kind of teenager who would simply blend into the background. Yet, as the weekend passed, there was still no sign of him. Growing increasingly desperate, his parents began to consider a new possibility. Had Andrew traveled to London? He was familiar with the city, his grandparents lived there, and he had visited often enough to feel comfortable navigating it alone. He had also recently expressed interest in visiting the new Tutankhamun exhibition at the British Museum. Perhaps, they wondered, he had decided to take a spontaneous trip to the capital that day. Then came a crucial breakthrough. A ticket clerk at Doncaster railway station came forward, recalling Andrew clearly. At 9:35 that morning, he had approached the counter and asked for a one-way ticket to London King's Cross. She remembered the interaction because it seemed unusual. Andrew looked young to be traveling alone on a school day, and when she offered him a return ticket, pointing out it would cost only 50 pence more, he declined. Witnesses who traveled on the same train later reported seeing him during the journey. He appeared calm and entirely normal, keeping his head down and focusing on his handheld PlayStation. At around 11:20 a.m., the train pulled into King's Cross Station. One passenger confirmed seeing Andrew disembark, stepping out into one of the busiest transport hubs in the United Kingdom. The confirmation that Andrew had traveled to London only deepened the confusion for his family. Just weeks earlier, he had been offered the chance to visit the capital and stay with his grandparents, an opportunity many teenagers would jump at, but Andrew had declined. Nothing about him suggested he had been planning a secret trip. Investigators and his parents began examining everything happening in London on September 14th, searching for any event that might have drawn him there. Andrew loved live music and had previously traveled to concerts with his father, including a Muse show. But nothing stood out that day. No gigs or events that seemed significant enough for him to make the journey alone. Another theory emerged. Perhaps he had traveled to London looking for work experience, something his older sister had done before. It was a possibility, but again, there was no evidence to support it. Every known contact Andrew had in London was reached out to. Friends, family members, acquaintances. No one had seen or heard from him. In 2007, public transport in London was free for children under 16. If Andrew had remained in the city, he would have been able to travel freely without leaving any kind of paper trail. It meant he could have moved around almost invisibly. But with only £200 withdrawn from his bank account and no additional clothing, no jacket, and no clear plan, the idea that he intended to stay away for long didn't make sense. That money would not last long when it came to food, transport, or accommodation. The thought that Andrew might be sleeping rough was deeply distressing to his family. It simply didn't fit with who he was. He was a creature of habit, quiet and cautious, and he looked much younger than his 14 years, which led to a far more troubling question. Had Andrew gone to London to meet someone? Outside of school, Andrew's social life was limited. He mainly spent time at home, occasionally socializing through church and the Scouts, both of which he had quietly stopped attending in the months leading up to his disappearance. The previous summer, Andrew had spent 2 weeks at a gifted and talented learning camp. When he returned home, his parents noticed he seemed unusually happy and energized. It raised the possibility that he may have met someone there and stayed in touch. But despite extensive inquiries, no evidence ever surfaced to suggest he had formed any lasting connections. Within the Gosden household, Andrew showed little interest in technology. His sister Charlotte was the only one with a laptop, and Andrew rarely used it. He didn't own a mobile phone, didn't have an email address, and seemed largely uninterested in computers or the growing world of social media. In 2007, platforms like MySpace and Bebo were becoming popular among teenagers, yet Andrew had never created any online profiles. It simply wasn't something he cared about. When police examined Charlotte's laptop, they found nothing to indicate Andrew had been communicating with anyone online. No suspicious messages, no hidden accounts, no searches relating to London or events happening there. Computers Andrew had access to at school were also thoroughly checked. Again, nothing. The only device he owned capable of accessing the internet was his handheld PlayStation, but to use its online features, he would have needed to create an email address and gaming account, and investigators found no evidence that he ever had. If Andrew had traveled to London to meet someone, there was no clear sign of who that person could have been. Investigators considered several possibilities for why Andrew might have traveled to London that morning. One fear was that he had been groomed or lured under false pretenses, though there was no concrete evidence to support this theory. Another question arose. Could Andrew have been struggling with his sexuality and feared rejection, perhaps deciding to run away to avoid confronting his family? Again, without a mobile phone, email, or any significant online activity, it seemed unlikely that he could have been contacted by anyone remotely. In the week leading up to his disappearance, it was noted that Andrew had occasionally walked to school instead of taking the bus, a journey that would take nearly an hour and a half on foot. This unusual behavior sparked speculation. Could he have been meeting someone along the way to accompany him? Some wondered whether he could have been given a secret phone by this person, enabling him to make plans to travel to London that Friday. But so far, nothing confirmed that any of these scenarios had actually occurred, only that Andrew had vanished without a trace. In the days and weeks after Andrew's disappearance, Kevin and Glenys Gosden made repeated trips to London, searching areas they knew he was familiar with. They handed out missing person flyers at train stations, museums, and venues Andrew might have visited, hoping someone would come forward with information. They also worked hard to keep media attention on the case, which brought forward numerous witness reports of Andrew being seen that day. Some came from the South Bank area, and his parents believed these might be credible sightings. But, unfortunately, none led anywhere. Meanwhile, South Yorkshire police were sent to King's Cross Station to comb through hundreds of hours of CCTV footage from the morning of September 14th. Finally, they had a breakthrough. At 11:24 a.m., Andrew was captured on camera amidst the crowd of passengers disembarking from the train from Doncaster. He was then seen exiting the main concourse before disappearing off-screen. By this point, Andrew had already been missing for 27 days, and while this confirmed he had arrived at King's Cross, it raised far more questions than it answered. He could have easily boarded one of the many London Underground trains that passed through the station, hopped on a bus to travel across the city, or even made his way to France on the Eurostar. However, he didn't have his passport, so this was unlikely. When police requested CCTV from other parts of the station and nearby shops, they discovered that much of the footage had already been overwritten, leaving Andrew's exact movements in the capital a frustrating and chilling mystery. According to his teachers at Macaulay Catholic High School, Andrew was academically exceptional, on a fast track that could have seen him attending Cambridge or Oxford, two of the most prestigious universities in the United Kingdom. Some speculated that perhaps he didn't want the ordinary life that seemed laid out for him, or felt he had lost control over his own future. But even this theory didn't sit right with those who knew him best. Andrew wouldn't have put his family through the anguish of a disappearance by running away. The bank withdrawal puzzled investigators even further. While he had taken most of his savings, over £100 in birthday money remained hidden in his bedroom. If he truly intended to start a new life, why leave it behind? At just 14, Andrew lacked the means to begin a new life on his own. He didn't have ID, and he would have struggled to find work or accommodation. He was also highly recognizable. His distinctive hairstyle and glasses would make him easy to spot. And as a perceptive young boy, he would have known he was visible on CCTV. If he had planned to disappear, it would have been far more plausible for him to alter his appearance or clothes to avoid detection. Which led to a chilling possibility. Perhaps Andrew was no longer alive. If he had been groomed or lured to London, he could have been kidnapped upon arrival. Or he may have encountered someone intent on harming him, an unplanned and tragic confrontation. He could have even had every intention of returning home to Doncaster, but crossed paths with the wrong person and never made it back. The question haunted everyone involved. If Andrew Gosden didn't want to vanish, what had really happened to him that day in London? If none of the previous explanations seemed plausible, there remained one more unthinkable possibility, that Andrew had taken his own life. Although he had never outwardly shown signs of depression, it was possible that he was harboring dark thoughts he felt unable to share with his family. Perhaps he had traveled to London that day to spend what he intended to be his last hours alone, sparing his family the unimaginable trauma of discovering his body at home. This theory could also explain some of the more puzzling details: the one-way train ticket, the lack of a jacket, and even leaving behind the charger for his PlayStation Portable. Each small choice suddenly took on a weight that suggested planning, intention, and a young boy navigating a world he felt trapped in. Yet, like all the theories in Andrew Gosden's case, there was no concrete evidence to confirm it, only questions, and a family desperate for answers. In the months following Andrew's disappearance, a new detail emerged online that added a fresh layer to the mystery. On a forum hosted by the music magazine Kerrang, a poster using the name Bex claimed she had been in all the same classes as Andrew, and that he had been bullied. She wrote, "And people wonder why he ran away." This could help explain some of Andrew's recent behavior, why he had occasionally walked to school instead of taking the bus, and why he hadn't gone to school at all that fateful day. Perhaps fear had kept him away, a quiet boy avoiding confrontation with bullies he didn't want to face. But even as new theories emerged, the absence of physical evidence continued to baffle investigators. None of the items Andrew had taken with him, his satchel, his money, his portable PlayStation, had ever been recovered. If he had met with a tragic accident, for example by falling or jumping into the River Thames, it was expected that at least one of his belongings, or even his body, would eventually have surfaced. Yet nothing did. The more time passed, the more Andrew Gosden's disappearance remained a chilling and unsolved mystery. A year after Andrew vanished, the reported sightings were still flooding in, 122 in total. Still clinging to hope, his parents pleaded for his return, insisting that anything that may have happened in the past year could be forgiven and that they could start fresh. His face appeared everywhere, printed on milk cartons, displayed throughout the shopping chain Iceland, a constant reminder to the public and a plea to anyone who might have seen him. Then, at Leominster Police Station in Herefordshire, West Midlands, an unusual incident occurred. The station, small and tucked away in a business park, often left its front desk unmanned. The intercom buzzed, and a man claimed he wanted to report a sighting of Andrew Gosden. But by the time officers went to let him in, he was gone. The station's remote location meant that someone would have had to make a deliberate effort to get there. Later, a letter arrived at the BBC, supposedly from the same man, claiming Andrew had been seen in Shrewsbury in November 2008. Whether it was a sick prank or a genuine tip, it added another layer of heartbreak. By this time, Andrew's family were coming to terms with the grim possibility that Andrew might already be dead or being held somewhere, far from freedom. Kevin Gosden was unable to return to work, struggling with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. But he refused to give up on finding Andrew. Every spare moment was devoted to the search. Kevin attended concerts he knew Andrew would have loved, hoping to catch even the smallest sign of him. He handed out flyers at events, spoke to the media whenever possible, and reached out to communities where he thought Andrew might be. 2 years on, the Gosdens faced another painful reality. If Andrew was still alive, he would have changed dramatically. The slight 14-year-old they remembered would now be a young man, and they feared he might no longer be recognizable. Some computer-generated images were created to show what he might look like 2 years later, a haunting reminder of how much time had passed. In a desperate bid for answers, the family contacted a company specializing in sonar detection, often used to locate missing people at sea. They asked for a 7-mile stretch of the River Thames to be scanned. The sonar did detect a body, but it wasn't Andrew. Once again, the Gosdens were left with heartache, and the mystery of their son's disappearance remained unsolved. It was around this time in 2017 that a curious lead emerged online. A man had been chatting with someone using the username Andyroo. During their conversation, the user revealed he needed help. His boyfriend had just walked out, and he was short £200 to pay rent. The exchange suggested that Andyroo was living in Lincoln. The man offered to send the money via bank transfer, but Andyroo claimed he didn't have a bank account. He explained that he had left home at 14, insisting that there had been no problems at home. He had just felt like leaving, before abruptly ending the conversation. Knowing about Andrew Gosden's disappearance, the man began to wonder, could this be him? He reached out to the Gosdens, who were stunned. Andyroo had been Andrew's childhood nickname. Unfortunately, despite this tantalizing lead, no further information could be uncovered about the person behind the Andyroo account, leaving the family with yet another unanswered question in a case full of them. Another age-progressed image was created, showing Andrew as a man in his early 20s. Special emphasis was placed on the distinctive double ridge on his right ear, one of the most unique features that could help identify him. One theory about Andrew's disappearance suggested he might have attended a concert on that Friday without his parents' permission, and that he could have met with foul play afterward. To investigate, police issued an appeal for anyone with footage from gigs held on September 14, 2007, asking them to come forward. This footage could then be reviewed by a group of super spotters, experts in facial recognition, to see if anyone resembling Andrew could be located. In 2017, Andrew's favorite band, Slipknot, were touring the UK. The Gosdens were convinced that if he were still alive, he would have been interested in attending one of their shows. Missing person flyers and the age-progressed image of Andrew were circulated at these concerts, in the hope that someone might finally recognize him. In January 2022, hope stirred briefly when news broke that 2 men had been arrested in connection with Andrew's case, suspected of human trafficking and possession of indecent images of children. They were later released on bail, and police disclosed no further details. By 2023, the suspects were officially eliminated from the investigation, leaving the Gosdens once again without answers. Kevin Gosden has since dedicated his life to helping others. He is now an ambassador for the charity Missing People educating and supporting young people who have run away or are thinking of doing so, ensuring they know where to turn. Yet the thought that Andrew might have been struggling silently still haunts him. Kevin urges parents to have open and honest conversations with their children, to make sure they know they are supported, and that there is always help if they feel like they might run away. Even today, the Gosdens continue to top up Andrew's bank account, untouched since 2007, in case he is still alive and needs support. They have never changed the locks on their doors, holding on to the hope that one day Andrew might walk back through them. For the Gosdens, hope and heartbreak exist side by side, a reminder of the enduring mystery of their son and the family's unbroken love for him.
And that's it for today's episode of Crime Bites. If there's one thing Andrew Gosden's story reminds us, it's that even the smallest disappearance can leave a lifetime of questions, and the search for answers is never truly over. Thank you for watching. If you want to explore more chilling true crime cases, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a bite. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who need us to keep looking.